morning everybody, welcome to another motorcycling video. It's been a while since I've been out motorcycling, although I did do a very brief one recently. It's the middle of July, as you can see by the title of this video, so it's not really motorcycle riding weather at the moment. But to put this in context, as you can see by the title, it's the 22nd of July, Saturday morning at about 20 to 8. I'm on the way down to the local park run, which is about 2 kilometres away. I'm on my 2012 Spyder RT Limited. That is the 1000cc semi-automatic 5-speed belt-driven version. Just after that, about 2014, I think, the engine size was increased from 1000 to 1330, and the gearbox was increased from a 5-speed to a 6-speed. And at the same time, I think all the Spyders, no matter what style they were, became semi-automatics rather than some which were manuals before that. After an overnight low of -7, it's about -3 degrees when the park run started at 8 a.m. and as you can see at the moment, it's a lovely blue sky and the sun is out, so even though there's a chill in the air and it's frosty, it seemed like a good day not just to ride the park run but to do a bit of a ride afterwards. So that gives you a bit of a context, and I'm going to talk about something that's not motorcycle related. So as I often say at this time, if you don't want to hear my opinions on something else, then turn the volume down and just enjoy the scenery, and otherwise listen in. I'm not asking you to agree with me, I'm just expressing an opinion, and so we'll get started. In Australia, we pride ourselves on being a modern democratic society. We pride ourselves on being open and transparent about most of the things that happen in our society. In other words, we have a free or relatively free media that is able to investigate things and report on things, and to, where necessary, expose wrongdoing, be it by individuals, by corporations, or in some cases the government. But of late there have been a series of royal commissions, including the Royal Commission into Sexual Abuse of Children, the Royal Commission into Aged Care, the Royal Commission into Treatment of Disabilities, and the most recent one, the Royal Commission into what was called robo-debt. And there's also been an ICAC inquiry, which have left us perhaps asking ourselves, or ought to be asking ourselves, some questions about just how true are those images or ideals we have about our openness, our transparency, our right to investigate, and our right to expose, and where perhaps we're appropriate to punish people for their wrongdoing. I want to focus in on two of these matters in particular, or two of these inquiries in particular. One is to do with the ICAC, which is the Independent... I'm sorry, I'm trying to think. The ICAC stands for Independent Commission Against Corruption, I think. Just can't remember the correct term for it, but it's the body, the statutory body that operates in New South Wales that is charged with investigating corruption by public officials. So it has a remit to look at the behaviour of politicians, of public servants, of people in local government, and of people who may be working in any way connected to the government. And recently they handed down a report on the former Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian. After a very painstaking and careful inquiry which lasted 2 years, they came to the conclusion that Gladys Berejiklian had engaged in serious corruption. Now, it's important first of all to know that ICAC is bound by an Act of Parliament, and it has the power to make a finding of serious corruption. Serious corruption doesn't necessarily mean that she has engaged in criminal behaviour, but she had engaged in behaviour that was against the public interest and against the responsibilities, both statutory and ethical, of her office. Now, exactly what was the problem with Gladys Berejiklian? Well, there are two things. Number one, she was in a secret relationship with a former Member of Parliament, with another Member of Parliament. Now, her personal life is not the subject of an inquiry and ought not to be the subject of salacious gossip. She's allowed to be in a relationship with whomever she wants, without that necessarily being a matter for the public to know about. The problem was this. The Member of Parliament that she was in a relationship with was lobbying her as Treasurer and then as Premier to fund projects in his electorate that her Cabinet colleagues thought were not worthy of being funded, and that public servants who were charged with investigating the value for money of these projects also thought were not worthy of being funded. In other words, she was throwing money at him or his electorate for one of two reasons: either to ensure his re-election or to maintain the close personal relationship she had with him. She gave evidence, and phone taps and so on indicated that she was in quite a serious relationship, an intimate relationship, where he had a key to her house. She talked about marriage and having a baby, and frequently sent him messages to pick up things like milk and bread for dinner and stuff like that. Now, while she was the Treasurer, she sat on a committee called the Expenditure Review Committee, whose job is to review all aspects of government expenditure and decide which ones are value for money and so on. She was awarding or agreeing to government money being spent in the electorate of her boyfriend without declaring that she was in a relationship with him, and then when those projects were being discussed, her leaving the room. At the time she was Treasurer, the Premier of New South Wales was Mike Baird, and he, in giving evidence to the ICAC inquiry, declared unequivocally that she should have disclosed this relationship to him, and he would have managed it, I presume, by noting it in the minutes and noting that she had left the room while discussions of projects involving her former boyfriend, or her former boyfriend now, electorate, were discussed and evaluated. The second reason that she was found to have engaged in corrupt behaviour is because she became aware that her boyfriend was using his position as an MP for personal financial gain. She became aware of this because he was telling her in phone calls about deals that he was making where he was going to earn commissions that would help him pay off his debts. Now, the problem with that is that she had at least a suspicion that he was engaged in behaviour that was contrary to the code of conduct of MPs. So concerned was she about this that she forced him to leave Parliament, and as a result the electorate that he represented was lost to an independent. Now, the situation there is that she was required by the Act that ICAC is governed by to report any suspicions of corrupt behaviour by any other member of government or any other member of the Parliament for that matter, or any public servant to ICAC, and for them to investigate and make a decision. She failed to do so, and on both grounds, according to the legislation that governs how the ICAC operates and makes its decisions, she was found to be corrupt. Despite that, something like 42% of people feel that she ought not to have resigned from her position as Premier. When she became aware that she was being investigated by ICAC, she immediately upped and resigned. Some people thought that was an overreaction, but other people thought it was the only honourable and proper thing that she could have done. The fact that even after the findings have been released, I think it's something like a 700-page report was released on the investigation, didn't seem to sway people's opinion very much to the view that she was actually engaged in corrupt behaviour. Now, I should acknowledge at this point that yes, she led the state through COVID, through fires and through floods, but that doesn't make her a saint. It means that she was a flawed person who made a serious error of judgment, and that the finding against her seems to have been the appropriate one. Now, the point I'm making here is that when things like this happen, we all sort of, and people think, well, that finding wasn't too bad, that she shouldn't have resigned. It's kind of a shrug of the shoulders, and it puts us in a position of saying that what the person has done isn't that bad after all, and we just sort of go on with life. But the problem is that the standards that we expect from our elected officials, from our politicians, from the people who govern us and represent us, get lower and lower and lower, to the point where instead of having a limbo bar to crawl under, you've now got to dig a hole under the limbo bar to get under it. And the standard, or the word standard, or the standards that exist for how public officials should behave, cease to exist. They have no meaning at all. Now, the second more disturbing one is this robo-debt thing, which I don't think I'm going to be able to explain in as much detail as I ought to, but essentially work this way. Imagine you were someone like an actor, a small part actor, and you depended on things like commercials to make your living. So you get a job and you make a commercial for something, and in that fortnight or in that period of time you get paid whatever it is that you get paid to make the commercial. The rest of the year you might not work. You might be getting occasional shifts at a cafe where you make coffee or pour beer or something like that, but for the rest of the year you don't work. You're required to report your income to Centrelink if you're on Centrelink benefits. What happened with this robo-debt is that once that person reported their income, the government had set up a automatic computerised system that said, well, if that person earned that amount of money that month, we're going to assume they earn that amount of money every month of the year, and we're either going to cut off their benefits or we're going to send them a bill to say you owe us this much because we overpaid you in benefits. Now, the problem is that the person might have earned that amount of money that month, but earned next to no money for the rest of the year because of the nature of their kind of work as a sort of jobbing actor, making commercials and so on. Or they simply just didn't work because the kind of thing that they do, there just wasn't work for, so they're on benefits. They then received these bills and were told that they had to repay this money. Something like 500,000 people received these bills and were forced into repaying the money. In the first instance, the scheme itself was illegal because income averaging based on 1 month's income is illegal according to the Federal Court of Australia. Not according to me, and not according to just some arbitrary do-gooder, but according to the Federal Court of Australia, the system that operated was illegal. Nevertheless, 4 ministers, including Scott Morrison, who introduced the system, Stuart Roberts, Alan Tudge and Christian Porter, who was previously Attorney General and a senior lawyer, none of them either sought to or inquired as to whether this scheme was legal, despite independent outside agencies telling them there were problems with the scheme, telling them that the scheme may be illegal. One former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who was a QC in his evidence to the Royal Commission, said he never turned his mind to the fact that this scheme might have been illegal. It's claimed that at least 3 people took their lives as a result of this scheme because they were so overwhelmed by the debt notice that they got and had no capacity to repay it, but they just thought the only way out of this is to end their lives. So far, the Royal Commission has handed down its report. There have been a few headlines in the newspapers and a few items in the daily television news and so on, and practically nothing has happened. 2 public servants, including Catherine Campbell, who was the head of the Department of Human Services, have now been stood down from their jobs. But before being stood down from her job, she was moved sideways to a job where she was paid almost $900,000 a year. Now, I want you to reflect on that for a moment, because average annual earnings in Australia are somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000 a year. So she was earning somewhere between 10 and 11 times more average annual earnings, refused to accept that anyone had taken their life, showed no contrition, showed no remorse, showed no concern, that the scheme that she knew was illegal because she'd been given advice by her own department that the scheme was illegal, but declined to include that information in the brief that she prepared for the Minister to take to Cabinet. But so far, nobody's been punished. Nobody's been made responsible. A Royal Commission report might make a few unpleasant findings about you, but if you're not in Parliament anymore, as 3 of those people I mentioned aren't, and Scott Morrison is expected soon also won't be in Parliament, there's really no consequence for you. Now, I'm not suggesting that those people necessarily need to be in the dock of a criminal court and be carted off to jail, but there ought to be some repercussions of what they did. They engaged in a scheme for 5 years that was illegal, that took money from people that they didn't owe, that threatened people with eviction from their houses and seizure of their assets, that shamed people who were not, to use that obnoxious term, dole bludgers, but people who just worked casually every now and again, and who were doing their best to report their income as they were required to do. But the government had set up this automatic scheme that they thought would save them some money. It turned out that saved them no money, and they had to pay all the money back to the people who were forced to pay these debts. And we've spent millions of dollars on a royal commission that's told us a number of things and made a number of findings and recommendations, one of which I should point out is to recommend to a government that before they introduce any policy whatsoever, that they make a conscious effort to determine if that policy or plan or program they want to introduce is legal. Now, can you imagine that for a moment? Just think about that for a moment. A government has to be told by a royal commission that before they start introducing programs of any sort, they should consult the senior law officer of the country, which would be the Solicitor General, and ask him if the scheme, or her, ask that person, if the scheme they are about to introduce is in fact legal. That is I'm not sure what the right word is. It's just extraordinary to say to a government, you have to determine if what you're going to do is legal before you do it. Every citizen in the country is expected to obey the law. Ignorance of the law is never a defence. You can't go to court and say, I didn't know that was against the law. The courts don't care. They expect you to obey the law. Not knowing that something is illegal isn't a defence. A government being told you have to check that something is illegal is an extraordinary recommendation. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed my commentary, and I hope you've enjoyed the scenery travelling around Goulburn, and I will talk to you again next time.